Thank you for having me.
Right, let's just jump into that conversation now. Does human rights aid in effective management of prisons?
Yes, human rights aids in effective management of prisons, because whenever we observe the human rights of the offenders, they will cooperate with us, and in that process we'll be able to rehabilitate them. Mm-hmm. So human rights help us to manage these offenders, because by doing that they'll know that we're also treating them humanely. Mm-hmm. And will be able to cooperate with us in the rehabilitation process, because to rehabilitate somebody they must be willing. Mm-hmm. So the process starts where we start how we handle them from the day they come in through the gate, right, to the point when they are released. If they see that you're not handling them well, they'll live with they'll be bitter with mm-hmm. society. You brought me here and you treated me badly, so when they go back, they'll now commit worse offenses and come back. Yeah. So we try to avoid that by treating them well, so that by the time they leave, they have some skill, mm-hmm. which will help them contribute to national development, to economic development.
Mm-hmm. Mm. That's interesting, but let's talk about the current state of prisons mm-hmm. in Kenya. How are things at the moment?
We appreciate government has funded us in rehabilitating some of our facilities, but we must admit that some of the facilities were constructed way back in the colonial days. Mm-hmm. But government has pumped in money, and we've built new structures around the country, to accommodate the prisons population. Mm-hmm. But because of the rising number of offenders in the community, you find that sometimes we're overstretched, because right, the facilities sometimes meant for about 30,000 people end up carrying about 60. So that's almost double. Mm-hmm. And that creates problems for us to manage. Mm-hmm. But through the support of government, we've been able to cooperate with other criminal justice agencies, especially through the National Council for Administration of Justice, where all criminal justice agencies meet. Mm-hmm. We are able to raise our voice sometimes when you see that we are overstretched, and interventions are done, mm-hmm. both from the level of the police, the judiciary, and in that way we end up minimizing imprisonment, mm-hmm. or minimizing the population in prisons. Mm-hmm. But again, there are other interventions which we're encouraging, alternatives to imprisonment, mm-hmm. like affordable fines, affordable bail, and alternative dispute resolution. People can meet and discuss problems before they land in court, mm-hmm. because some issues which are taken to court don't really belong to the court. Mm-hmm. So these issues can be solved back in the village, just the traditional way, the way we used to have elders sorting out some of this. But you find that sometimes people are so litigious, mm-hmm. that people end up in courts with some very petty issues, which right, end up making that person be locked up. Mm-hmm. Yet he could have been maintained, could have been in the society, mm-hmm. Carrying out his socio-economic activities and help supporting his family. Because mm-hmm. Once somebody is locked up, a very big chunk of people are cut off from livelihood.
For sure.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the capacity that you mentioned. Yes. Like 30,000, and you end up having a lot of people in one facility. Has that been sorted out? We are sorting it out, because we're working closely with the community service orders, mm-hmm. Petty offenders, especially the issue of petty offenders. The review of also the judiciary has been reviewing some of the cases and sending them to community service, so that these people can serve the community outside there rather than in prisons, mm-hmm. so that we remain with long-termers, mm-hmm. whom we can train, who can sit for exams. Somebody who comes in for 2 weeks will not be able to sit for KCSE. Right. Somebody who comes in for 3 weeks will not be able to sit for Standard 7 exams, mm-hmm. Standard 8. Yeah.
The same with the university degrees. We have people who are doing degrees, but these are long-termers.
They're doing degrees in the
prisons, yes. So our educational programs require those who have a longer sentence, mm-hmm. so that they can be able to go through the program. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, some people are illiterate when they come into prison, yeah. and by the time they leave, they have degrees, mm-hmm. or they have CPAs, mm-hmm. they have school certificates, both Standard 8 and Standard 7. Mm-hmm. So we find that sometimes that opportunity for the long-termer is better. They'll get education in prisons. Mm-hmm. But if you bring somebody of 2 weeks, we waste a lot of stationary, mm-hmm. government money processing them through the criminal justice system. And at the end, we release them as they came, because we have not been able to rehabilitate them. Mm-hmm. So it's important that the petty offenders are kept out of prisons, mm-hmm. so that they pay fines, or they work in community projects, they go and plant, like now, afforestation. Mm-hmm. We are encouraging the community to use them to plant trees in the community, mm-hmm. or in the schools, clean the hospitals. Government buildings can be cleaned by these offenders rather than coming where they cost us and yet we don't end up rehabilitating them. Then when they go back, they commit worse crimes because they get contaminated in the prison. Once they meet these hardcore guys, they'll go out there and commit worse offenses. So the best is to keep these petty offenders out of the system.
Right. How does the Kenya Prison Service engage stakeholders when it comes to improving the prison sector? We
work closely with many stakeholders. For example, we are now setting up a program with the UN ODC and courtesy of UNODC and UNDP. We are working with UNODC to start a program called Program for Legal Empowerment and Aid Delivery. This program cuts across the criminal justice system, but for prisons, we'll try to leverage on technology so that we don't spend much taking people to prisons. They can do their cases while they are in prison without going to the courts. For example, if you're going for a mention, government uses a lot of fuel to take you to court. But if you are in the prison and there's technology enabled, you can be able to do a case while you're in the prison, and which you're doing now. From the time when COVID came, we started leveraging on technology so that we don't spend a lot of resources taking people to courts, to sometimes even hospitals. We can use telemedicine. A doctor can consult the clinical officer in the prison or the doctor, and they do some operations within the prison without necessarily delivering this man to go and clog the system in Kenyatta or in Coast General Hospital or in Kisumu in the hospitals. So we're trying to use technology to reduce the costs, which our costs. Because once we adopt this technology, then we can be able to do court cases while we're within the prison. Unless you are physically required to be in court, it can be done through technology.
Would you say that's one of the achievements that
the Kenya Prison Service, and this program, I've said, Program for Legal Aid Empowerment, is now bringing that technology and supporting us so that we have that technology. We train our officers, we train the prisoners how to use the technology across the country so that we reduce the number of people moving around. Actually, it's a risk. When a lot of prisoners are on the way, if they happen to escape, you hear everybody complaining. These hardcore people are somewhere on the run. Yeah? So we want them to be where they are secure. We do their cases online. Unless they are required to be in court, we can use technology and manage their cases while they're in prisons.
Any other milestones then you can cite?
We can say that the program again also helps us to educate the prisoners and the officers in the law, so that some can go to court and just raise their hand and raise the issues, because sometimes people are intimidated by court processes. But when they get to know the basics about the law, they'll be able to prosecute their cases and reduce the number of people in prison, because some end up in prison because they are ignorant, that they can raise their hand and tell the magistrate, I have this issue. They can't even, in mitigation, at the tail end of the process, they can't even tell the magistrate, I have children. They just keep quiet. Others admit, yet they could have defended themselves, because most of the people who turn up in prisons are the poor, because they can't afford lawyers. So sometimes they end up admitting things that maybe they never even committed. So we find that when they come to prison, they start telling us, oh, I was innocent, but I didn't know that I could have said this. So when we educate them on the law, they prosecute their cases faster also, because as long as they stay in the prison, it's another cost to government. It's another cost to everybody, the judiciary, the police. As long as they're still in the pipeline, the criminal justice system, they cost government a lot of money. But if they can be handled quickly, they finish their cases and move. If the innocents go out, and those who are guilty, who have offended society, come in. Because the prison is meant for those who have offended society. If you are innocent, you're not supposed to be in prison. You're supposed to be out there developing the country.
What about challenges, just away from the capacity that we're talking about? Are there any specific challenges?
We have challenges in terms of, government supports us with a lot of budgetary support, but there are challenges. Sometimes we find that overcrowding contribute to diseases. So some cross-infection. You see, like recently we had this problem with COVID. We had to do a lot of isolation, and our donors came in and supported us to expand our isolation capacity so that we could avoid contaminating also the public. That's why I'm saying even the technology helped us, because we could avoid sending people to court who will go and infect others out there. They were prosecuting their matters in court. We had phones, they talked to their families, so that to maintain that link with the family, because at the end of the day we'll release them. And we make sure that in the rehabilitation process, they must maintain contact with their family. Some have children who are in school. They need to get updates on how the children are doing. And if they lose that contact, when they go out, the children will be like, who's this?
I'm just curious, before you continue, how did you handle the COVID situation with prisoners in one place?
Actually, let me tell you, Kenya was recognized as #1 in handling COVID.
Right.
And our doctors were called to Geneva to go and showcase what they did. Because we actually managed to manage COVID by keeping offenders away from the public. Okay. And anybody who would come in will be kept in quarantine until certified fit to join the rest of the prison population. So we managed to do that so well that I happened to have been in a conference in Geneva, and they were saying Iraq and Kenya and Iraq, for some reason Iraq being
right.
Iraq Kenya and Iraq were the ones. Kenya was #1, then Iraq came second to manage COVID. I don't know how they did it there, but our doctors were able to attend a conference for all doctors in prisons, and they showcased what Kenya did. So Kenya was recognized for that, for managing COVID in such a way that the community did not get infected by people who are in prison, maybe who had it in prison, or the prisoners were not infected by those who are coming from outside in the community, because every day people come into prison. So by making sure that they are not in contact with the rest of the prison population, you arrive, you're quarantined until you are certified by the doctors that you are fit to join the rest of the prison population. You could not join that population. So that helped us manage COVID. And then, of course, we got a lot of support, like I've said. We got medical support, we got the vaccines, and we vaccinated both our officers and the inmates. We gave the donors, especially the ICRC, they gave us a lot of support in terms of even building the isolation wards, the capacity, and they also gave us masks, material to make masks. So we thank them. They spent about $10,000 US.
But things went pretty well.
They went pretty well.
Right. Finally, just maybe your final thoughts on how to improve the state of prisoners or prison service in Kenya.
We would want everybody to be involved. It's not a prison officers institution. It's a government institution. It's a Kenyan institution. All of us be involved, because as the donors come in, they also need Kenyans, the stakeholders. Right now, we're working a lot with NGOs. In 2001, we had this open door policy declared by the commissioner then, Mr. Abraham Kamakino. And we allowed, many NGOs were allowed to come in. You had Uncle Mudi Awori, that was the time. Mudi Awori was in charge. He's the vice president then. And of course, the goodwill of government from President Kibaki coming down. And a lot of reforms happened around that time, and we're still benefiting from those reforms. That's why we're working with those NGOs. Right now, I've come from Naivasha. We had a big event with some friends from America. That is the Jones Day is a little law firm run by a lady judge, a retired lady judge. They're educating our officers and prisoners in Naivasha. 61 of them are in that cohort.
That's interesting.
And they are from different parts of the country. These officers will go back and train the prisoners to run their cases in court. Those are paralegals. And they are supported by an NGO, Kenyan NGO called Justice Defenders, led by Madam Wachira. And courtesy of Madam Wachira, they have come all the way from America. They've been running the course from yesterday, and they are still there. So today I went to open the course, and I think we need that kind of support. We work with many other NGOs in the Kenya. So we like I've said, the PLEAD and also the UN, especially the PLEAD program, will completely help us also make that paralegal education reach more stations, because now we're in the planning stage, but we've already planned to train more officers across the country through that program.